Think4Purpose.com is my company. It's also my website, obviously. So feel free to engage, come and have a chat with me at any stage. It costs nothing to talk to people. And dialogue is one of the most important functions we have. What I'm going to be speaking about today is, I suppose, ourselves as complex systems. We're a unique nexus of talents and temperament. And, we bring something to the table that in actual fact is very, very precious. We're cognitive systems, we're adaptive. And the talk that I want to go into, I suppose, is in relation to, first of all, what is a Protean career? And it's one that, here's Proteus, first of all, I should introduce him. And he is a mythological figure from Greek classics, a god of elusive sea change, which suggests, I suppose, the constantly changing nature of the sea, the liquid quality of water. And he's also associated with being able to see into the future and shape shift in response to that. So that's why I like him as a theme with respect to careers. And the reason Think4Purpose use a Protean approach is that currently the future is quite unpredictable. And therefore, what I'm proposing is that we need to take a systems approach. So we need to assume, first of all, that we are ourselves cognitive systems and we are innately resilient and capable of being adaptive, but we're also hard to figure out. So how I try and figure us out and how I work with the people I career coach is to integrate a lot of the Greek classics in actual fact, and also combine that with 20 years of research that we have now into cognition. Quite a lot of that, by the way, has been done for the sake of machine learning. So we're going to go through some of those points. And we're also going to look at, with respect to the approach that I use, and that's to use a tool for problem-based learning, because it's more durable when we engage people and we challenge them in order to improve their capabilities. And I use a tool called Miro. So some of the slides you're going to see are from Miro. They're little exercises that I do with people, etc. So there's no point oversimplifying it. Systems by their very nature can be counterintuitive. So in fact, careers too are complicated. We're complicated, and how we learn is a function both of our experience and also our cognition. Sheaf was speaking about models earlier on. Everything we understand of the world is actually through models, not necessarily data models, but they're very useful, but what I call mental models. And they're the frameworks consisting of the underlying assumptions we have from our experiences and our context, and they're what help us organize and understand information. So that's highly individual. So every career design really needs to be individualized, it needs to be tailored, and it needs to take on board the environment that we're in. And that is what we call a VUCA environment. It's volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous. So it's placing pressures on us from the point of view of what we call cognitive load. And the brain really does not like uncertainty above all else, because the brain works as an anticipation machine. In fact, we'd prefer to know a future event is definitely going to be negative than not know whether it's positive or negative, which is from the point of view of how we're experiencing COVID at the particular time. So basically, no system is static, but it can be stable. So there is good news here. There's a lot we can do to support ourselves, and a lot of frameworks we can use to make our career transitioning and our career planning a better process. So I take a quality by design approach because my background is quality management, and I use the Greek classics. So what I'm interested in is purpose. How do we make ourselves fit for purpose? And telos, the Greek word for purpose, actually does have an ethical dimension to it as well, as does logos. So our good reasoning is about how we speak to one another and how we interpret our experiences, partly through talking about them, which is what coaching gives us a safe place to do. We also need to look at all the social relationships. Systems, are consisting of elements that interrelate, I should say, and are interdependent. So in that respect, we need to take a systems approach to try and make the whole greater than the sum of its parts. We need to understand those particular parts and elements and how they relate to one another. And we also need to be curious. That's important, but we need to be curious in a constructive way. So we'll talk about some of these elements, and what we're trying to do at Think4Purpose is help people to understand themselves, because that level of self-management is just a reality now from the point of view of how we work together. So the world of work is changing. If we look at work systems, first of all, from a big picture point of view, there's a lot of emphasis now on specialists, and it's tempting to think of our career as really a journey to become increasingly specialist. But the reality is it takes groups of us to get big projects done. So what's as important as our specialist skills is how we work with other people. And that's become quite open in some respects, But also because we're working remotely, it's a little bit harder too. You can't just walk by somebody's desk and ask them something in passing. So in theory, we can contact anyone we need to contact, but in practice, that's actually getting a little bit harder because of remote working. Also, how we looked at careers in the past was very much in a linear way, okay? So they were taking the same size steps up a corporate ladder. And in actual fact, that's not a reflection of how the world works anymore. It's far more organic in some respects. Opportunities pop up when you're not expecting them to. So we're better off using a different model now, which is, I suppose, a combination of looking at, how nature works, how we grow, how do we create ladders for ourselves? How do we spot when the ladders are actually popping up all of a sudden and unexpectedly? And how do we grow our opportunities? So a Protean approach reflects nature because it looks at self-renewal properties, but it also puts an expectation that we're self-directed as well. So, really, it's not up to an employer to guide us as to the pace or the direction of our career. It's up to ourselves. And what we're in is really a knowledge business and a knowledge game. So we can look and in a way use biomimicry to look at how nature works to learn how we should manage our careers too. If we look at the ant colony, there's no central commander telling the ant what to do, but it can still build some very miraculous structures. So we'll talk about ants a little bit later. We'll also look at spiders, because spiders, I suppose, in a way, if we look at the intranet itself, is a good example of how we can create knowledge structures that other people can build on after us too. So that's important, is, are we creating the type of knowledge and working in a way that other people can work with us? Because ultimately what we want to do is build systems that are more intelligent than we are. So we need to be able to cross-pollinate ideas together too. So it's not about how smart any of us are as individuals anymore. Human intelligence is about how well we can work together, and that's what we really need to keep in mind. We also, I suppose, are aware of with systems is that structure really influences how systems behave. And as I said earlier on, the career paths now that we're going to see are a lot less linear than they were before. So the structure on the right more reflects probably what we will see from the point of view of how growth and development is really happening within companies. So you're not taking a one straight line up a corporate ladder. You need to be willing to change directions from time to time, and not just when you hit obstacles, but because you want to, and because you know what your purpose is and what you want to do. And sometimes that might mean taking a step sideways, not always looking at climbing up a particular ladder, but taking side steps, looking at multi-tracking, and looking at all the various different options that are available to us, because ultimately we are in a competitive world. And how does an antelope compare in a competitive world? Sometimes it acts unpredictably. When we see them hopping around in the savannah, that's not by accident. That's because that's the best means for their survival. So for our survival and our careers to thrive, we need to think strategically as well. And we need to think, okay, what's going to work for me best for the long-term approach that I want to take? And that's not straightforward because of us, we're systems, and we have multiple layers. As I said before, the mental models are at the bottom of the iceberg. They're the assumptions, our beliefs that are driving a lot of our decisions. And sometimes we're not that self-aware. We're just going with the flow. So some of the things that we can do would be, don't overestimate the importance of any single event. Okay, if you don't get an interview, that does not mean you're necessarily not cut out for a particular company or not good at interviewing. It just means that you need to diagnose and analyze what went maybe wrong, but also think maybe the company weren't right for me. Okay, so we don't need to jump to conclusions. We need to take, I suppose, systems point of view where we look at the big picture. We also, however, do need to take responsibility that sometimes patterns of behavior that aren't good for us will still reinforce themselves. So feedback loops can be balancing or reinforcing for good or bad. So we need to keep an eye on that. So again, are we learning as much as we can from each of our work opportunities and experiences? Sometimes learning loops are just incomplete or they're broken. So we'll talk about those a little bit later. And also remember, learning itself is subject to mental models. Whether we believe we can learn something or not, that really, really matters. So what a lot of companies and employers are looking for is, can we prove that we have a growth mindset, for example? And also, are there actually self-limiting loops that we have around our own beliefs that are stopping us achieve everything in our careers that we could achieve? Sometimes we miss key interconnections within different elements. And this is kind of how I line up when I'm working with somebody. We model out all the different elements of their career. We have question marks because I don't know for you what are important elements. What I do know, however, is that your hard skills and soft skills are equally important, and that these feed off one another, because there's no point having fantastic problem solving tools if you don't see anything as being your problem to solve in the first place and you don't take ownership. What's really important is also that you spot the interrelationships between all of these elements and where are the key ones that will really mean something for you from the point of view of bringing value to your career. So when I talk about transversal skills, it's also identifying which are the skills that will transfer best between project to project, job to job. Are you honing these in particular? Are there thinking habits you've inherited from your family or your education that aren't serving you particularly well? And then there's aspects of your personality. You didn't choose your personality, but within it are your cognitive preferences. So how you take information and how you make decisions, they're skewed a little bit by your personal preferences. So to become more aware of those can be useful. But for any of you, you'll have your own individual model. This is the Miro, I suppose, representation. And I work to build this up so that you have a better understanding of yourself. And then this dotted line around the outside is, because we're going to build up this model slowly over the presentation, this is to represent recursiveness. Sometimes you're learning without even realizing it. If you're talking about your project risk, you talk about known unknowns, unknown unknowns, et cetera, et cetera. We'll talk about those too. How do we get to the bottom of those? Because in a way, you're designing your system. You are your cognitive system for the purposes of your career. And you need to understand why systems fail. And they fail mainly for 6 particular reasons. They fail because they're not fit for purpose, or they don't detect errors well, or they're not supported well, or they lack integrity, or they just fail to adapt and learn, or there's poor design. And that isn't always straightforward. What we might see as, okay, I've been beleaguered with a personality that's not suited for working with other people, not necessarily the case. Often introverts are really effective in working with groups. It's just finding out the techniques, for instance, that can help to do that and bring it to the fore. Also, no single web is the same as another web, even though the structure is common. So it's finding the singularity and what can, I suppose, help you differentiate yourself in a positive way within the workforce, but also learning to detect errors. And I suppose the fundamental one is overconfidence. But what I find much more often is actually that people suffer from imposter syndrome. And they assume that everything they know, everybody else also knows. And that's actually not the case. You are always bringing something unique to the table. Part of the reason for that is just because the nature of knowledge itself has expanded so much that we have more specialists, and you're being trained within education to be industry ready. So you're being more specialist trained. So even college to college, as much as 40 to 50% of course material on fundamental modules, like for instance, fluid mechanics, that can differ from college to college. So when employers want cognitive diversity, they're always better to hire a diverse base of people from different colleges. And also what you'll find is you inevitably then for that reason will be bringing something unique to the table. The other, I suppose, thing to avoid from the point of error is jump too far ahead, okay? You should only really commit to plans for as far ahead as you can predict in volatile situations or projects. And don't jump to worst case scenario either, okay? Because even when something goes wrong along the way, that doesn't mean you need to catastrophize that. And neither does it mean that you should play victim, because if you play victim, unfortunately, you're not going to learn, because you're not going to put the onus on yourself to learn the lessons you need to learn, because you're going to narrow yourself down and paint yourself into a corner. So I'm not going to go into the details for this, but really overconfidence is what blocks learning in particular. And the reason it does that is we start to just try and prove we're right all the time, when most of the important learning that we have to do is based on making mistakes. And it's important we're not afraid to make mistakes, and that we find ourselves and locate for ourselves psychologically safe workplaces where we feel, yeah, I can make a mistake and I can admit I need help. So they're the employers to look for, and look for signs of that even in the interview process. So we need to do a few maps. We need to map out what are our skills and knowledge that are most valuable to us. Like the spider's web too, sometimes there'll be a few gaps along the way. Well, where are those gaps and will they hurt us? So that's another exercise we do on Miro, is to map out your career and also make key connections with your interests. Remember, an awful lot of the breakthroughs we have in science, the pacemaker, for example, even the PCR testing that we depend on now, they happen by accident, but they also happen because people spotted a connection. So in the case of PCR tests, they exist because the chemist in question wasn't just a good chemist and wasn't just a research chemist, but he remembered that growing up as a kid, his mother had her own laundry business, and he saw the starch hardening on her kitchen table and remembered that it formed into a gel. So it's by actually the connections sometimes between our personal interests and our wide range of interests together with our hard skills, the knowledge we've learned in college, and also our thinking techniques and our way of reasoning. It's all those things coming together that make a difference. But we can overlook that, and mapping something out and visually representing it helps us prevent that. The other thing we can map out is our belief system, because sometimes our career logic is flawed. And actually, you know, a lot of people identify with this at times feeling of, okay, I'm going nowhere with my career. And it's usually based on 4 of these particular reasons. Either they're lacking confidence, or imposter syndrome, they think other people are smarter, or they forget what normal distribution is. Even if they're a statistician, being average is good. You are easy to manage and easy to work with. But maybe it's, I sometimes think, okay, I'm failing here, I'm not getting where I want because there's no opportunities, but they're failing to see the opportunities that are there to learn, which are the more important ones than putting ourselves in any particular box or taking any particular steps up the career ladder. So these are kind of, yeah, I suppose this is another map or Miro exercise that we do, where we try and spot, okay, what are the belief loops that are holding us back? A common one in a career is, I've been in this company 3 years, I haven't got a promotion, it's time to get up or get out. Not necessarily the case, you know, but combined with this other belief loop, it gets reinforced, which is that each job is a stepping stone to the next job. Once we look at jobs in that light, really we stop learning within that job, okay? To a degree, you do need to visualize yourself in the next job in order to get it at an interview stage, but you also need to realize fully the learning opportunities that are there for you in each job that you're in. So we'll look a little bit later at how could we replace these 2 reinforcing belief loops that aren't helping you get anywhere. So now we start kind of broadening out and thinking more in terms of, look, where are the key leverage points in our career? And we need to reflect. We need to look back and see what patterns emerge there. And we need to look at also, you know, what's our behavior that shows us, for example, maybe we're very strong from a curiosity point of view, but that's not been leveraged within the career. And the reason that happens is often because we haven't worked across enough projects, or we haven't worked on projects that are complex enough for our curiosity to really be capitalized on. Or maybe we haven't developed another soft skill that is equally important for curiosity to really bring its value to the table, and that's stress tolerance, okay? In order to be curious and for that to really mean something, you also need to be able to actually tolerate the feeling of discomfort, of being in your discomfort zone, and sometimes of even unlearning things you thought you knew. Then we can combine that with experience of gaining, you know, more complex project experience, for example, and it becomes a lever so that we can get greater than the whole of its parts from our career. Okay, so here's an example of a career loop that does work, and it's a Protean one. Let's assume careers are non-linear, and then the actions that we take mean that we start to evolve within our role, and we start to achieve what we want to learn, and then that learning catapults us and supports us identifying other stretch opportunities. So we're now entering into the willingness to enter into a discomfort zone, which is necessary for learning. So there's a lot of things we can do to support ourselves from a self-organizing and learning point of view. Reflection, as I said, is one. Visualization is important. If you want to imagine yourself, you know, imagine yourself 6 months in the future. What would you like to have achieved? And then it's easier to see what you need to do to actually get there. Also, you know, you can take a DMAIC approach. You can, you know, put your risk hat on for a second. And what you can do then is you can start looking at from a time point of view what you need to do by when and set a few milestones. Okay, don't have them too aggressive, but we should have goals looking every 3 months out. We should have a new goal. We should also reward ourselves when we make progress on those goals. And we should also build in feedback loops that keep us honest as to whether or not we're achieving those loops, and even what I call early warning systems. So I don't know if you're familiar with this bowl of M&Ms, but this is where we kind of set ourselves up that if we're not getting where we need to know, we get an early warning system. And it's a metaphor that I'm borrowing from Van Halen, the rock band. They were used a lot of pyrotechnics. They need to be very careful from the point of view of risk. So they had a long checklist of things that they needed the crews who were developing their rigs and setting their stages to go through. But a quick way of checking, had they read the checklist, was halfway through the checklist was, we want a bowl of M&Ms with no brown ones in it. And if they found when they got to the gig in the green room, there were brown M&Ms, they knew they needed to meticulously go through the rest of the checklist. So they kept the crews honest, and we can keep ourselves honest too. We can set little tripwires up for ourselves. So if we don't achieve certain milestones by a certain time, then that triggers a different behavior in us. And then maybe it's time to talk to a coach about, okay, why is this an obstacle for me? So we have lots of people to help us. Okay, this is not a journey you take on your own. Your employer is the obvious one that you look at to help you, but you can have mentors both within your own employer and outside. The key thing is to be learning. Develop your own learning network. Okay, there are people you went to college with who took a different career path. You can still learn from them, by the way. Okay, they can be a reference class for you that checks out, is there something more interesting happening in an adjacent industry? And even, are my skills actually more valuable in that industry now? Should I consider a change? But we learn mainly from our peers. Set yourself up, to introduce yourself to new colleagues who maybe don't have the opportunity to have a water cooler conversation with, but you can set up an all I can ask session for 15 minutes on Zoom, make the most of that. So no one of these particular elements is more important, for everybody. It's down to the individual, but the goal is you become as self-organizing as you can. And you're not asking for favors, by the way, to go out and seek a mentor. Mentors are people who are equally committed to learning. I've mentored people and learned just as much from mentoring them as they have from me mentoring them, believe me. We're all in the same game here, and that is to learn. That is the main source of competitive advantage for all of us. But unfortunately, we don't always see when we are learning and when we're not. Like our unknown unknowns on projects, when we're managing agile projects, sometimes we're unconscious of our competencies. So to go to a peer and ask them, well, what am I good at? What do I stand out at doing well is a really good place to start. So asking the right questions, inquiry. That's one of the few advantages human intelligence still has over artificial intelligence. We can generate our own questions. We can also reflect, as I said earlier, and learn from the patterns of our previous behavior. And we can also enter into dialogue. We can talk to one another. You can come with one insight. I can come with the second, but we can actually reach a third together. We need to talk to each other in order to progress our careers. And then what happens is we're, first of all, from an inquiry point of view, we apply a Socratic approach. So we're asking enough questions, and it's not the quantity that matters, it's the quality. And we're also, when we're mentoring other people, we're learning because actually they're reminding us the value of a beginner's mind to ask the unobvious questions. So then we avoid a painting by numbers, join the dots approach to our careers. And we build in through all these relationships and through deliberately practicing the feedback loops that we need. So I'm not going to have time, I think, to go through this, Ruth. And I hear you shuffling in the background.
Well, sorry, I was trying to get my shuffling low key.
Were you? Sorry.
Okay, so 5 minutes. 5 minutes. So keep going for the 5 if you want to. Yeah,
I will. Thank you. I'm going to keep going with my animal metaphors. Okay, biomimicry is fantastic for innovation, right? And time is not on our side. So the quicker we can explain complex ideas using simple metaphors, the better. So let's look at machine learning and what it's learned from the ant. And what it's learned is the ant colony works on very simple algorithms, actually, to achieve very big things. And even in our careers, we need to know when is it time to explore and gather new information, and when is it time to exploit that information. When we get to the stage in our careers where we're more at the spider stage, as I call it, we need to be learning how to continuously improve and faster. And when we get to the B stage, we're really transforming not just ourselves, but our entire colonies then. So our thinking modes shift throughout our careers. We move from procedural and tactical to being more creative and evolving knowledge structures around us that benefit other people, to looking at these knowledge structures strategically. How can we improve them? And then we need to look at our purpose. Okay, at the beginning, most of us are working within systems and models. As we progress, we should be working on them. And eventually we should be generating them, or at least generating the principles and philosophies behind them, and making sure we cross-pollinate that across our organizations. So professionally, our focus at the beginning is differentiating. It's developing a competency and then realizing when is that most useful. Next stage in our career, we need to diversify. So one of the best ways we have of doing that is obviously to learn how to manage projects. That really diversifies our skills well. And then we need to learn, how do we teach these skills to other people? So in a way, we've 3 different types of learning going on. We've single loop where we correct our mistakes, follow checklists. These are ordered ways of correcting, errors that are made and identifying defects ahead of time. But then double loop is more learning how to do that within our projects. How do we learn to develop the tools that help other people spot mistakes? But then we get to triple loop learning and we're reinventing. How do we manage projects at all? Are the Scrum projects the best way to go? Or do we need another philosophy around how we run our projects now? So if you want to look at, I suppose, the Agile algorithm I talked about earlier and how that's used by robots within the construction industry, you can. But it is useful to be thinking from the point of view of just different stages and also the different, what should occupy us at the different stages in our career. So back to our Agile projects, you are your most important Agile project. So those of you who are used to using Agile methodologies, this is one little Miro exercise I use to apply that to yourself, because there's lots you don't know about yourself. There's some things your colleagues don't know about you that are constructive. You don't need to reveal everything about yourself and paint yourself into a box or be stereotyped in any way. But what you do need to know is that the most important hard and soft skills people are aware of. And some of those you're not aware. You've got blind spots. So you need a second person like a coach or a peer or a mentor to help you identify those. And then you need to check out, are my best skills really my best skills, too. So we're constantly keeping ourselves honest. And here are just 3 recommended resources I have. Really thinking in systems has nothing to do with careers as such, but if you can become a better systems thinker, then apply that to your careers. And this lady from MIT has probably written, I think, one of the most influential books on systems that you can listen to on Audible, or you can read, or whatever you wish to do. The 5th discipline is about organizational learning and how we apply systems thinking to teamwork. So I always recommend that too, by Peter Senge. And finally, understand what a growth mindset is. I thought I understood it. And then I realized, well, I do in theory, but actually my own belief was around a fixed mindset. I actually had fallen into the beliefs of my own parents who saw intelligence as something that was fixed. I used to say about people, oh, sure, they don't have to work hard at all, they have brains to burn. It doesn't matter, right? The size of our brain is completely irrelevant. Even how smart we are can be irrelevant as to the success or failure of our careers. Other things can matter equally so. So if you want to learn more about that, come and talk to me. It costs nothing to talk. Come and have a chat. Thanks for inviting me on, Ruth. And I hope that you got something out of today. Did I even share my screen? I hope I did.
Oh, you did.
Fiona, I was just looking to say, had I? Okay, great.
Can I say to you, so that's Fiona Fennell, Think for Purpose. That might be maybe the 3rd time I've gotten to see that. And honestly, I think I've picked up something new the 2nd and the 3rd time that I watched it.
I'm improving too, and I'm also making brand new mistakes every day. That is part of us.
You don't learn if you're not making mistakes, I maintain.
It's a lot of it's more durable, actually. That's definitely been proven to be the case.
Yeah. That's what I'll go with. And I love the idea of setting goals, short-term goals along the way, but keeping what did you call it? A feedback, a feedback loop, honest, just to make sure.
Having early morning systems. Yeah, they're, managing projects. We're our most important project, and we're always a work in progress.
Yeah. I love the M&M story.
I've heard that story. That before, no?
No, I've heard it many times, but every time I hear it, I think how clever just to put in that one little check.
People are not always what they seem, They look like rockers that you just couldn't care less, but they cared a great deal. They really did. Brilliant. They knew what they were doing.
Brilliant. Listen, I'm going to leave you go, Fiona Fennell. Think for Purpose. Thank you so much for coming on and talking today.
Nice to see you again.
Really lovely to see you again. Who knows? We might get to do it in real life the next time.
Come and talk to me anytime, Ruth. You're more than welcome.
Well, thank you.
As anybody else is who is checking in. Think4Purpose.com. Just contact me on my website. I'm more than happy to talk to anybody.
Brilliant. Fiona, you're an absolute star. Thanks a million.